Getting close to the Hells Angels isn't just difficult, it's dangerous. Their code of silence is legendary, and very few outsiders ever hear what truly happens behind clubhouse doors. But sometimes that wall cracks. Former presidents, insiders, and even an undercover federal agent have gone on record exposing moments of brutality, ritual, and betrayal. These are not rumors or second-hand stories, they're first-hand accounts. Here are 7 of the most disturbing interviews ever given by men who lived inside the world they were sworn to protect. Number 7. Charles Peewee Goldsmith. Charles Peewee Goldsmith wasn't just another Hells Angels member passing through history. He rose to become president of the Las Vegas Charter, a position that placed him at the center of every major decision the club made in that territory. Disputes, alliances, retaliation, nothing serious happened without his approval. So when Goldsmith later spoke in interviews, what shocked listeners wasn't bravado or exaggeration. It was the calm, almost detached way he described extreme violence, as if he were recalling routine maintenance rather than life or death encounters.
It was like in the Hells Angels, because I was Peewee, I was the big, tall Peewee, and then there were shorter Peewees. There were 4 of us, and the other Peewees were real short.
So were you president in the Senate?
Oh yeah, I was, the first year I got my patch, and then the second year they brought me up for president, and I was president the whole time.
In one interview, Goldsmith described a confrontation with rival outlaws that escalated in seconds. There were no warnings, no negotiations. One moment there was tension, the next it exploded. A man rushed past him. Goldsmith grabbed him, slammed him to the ground, and began punching. He explained that there was no emotion driving it, no anger, no fear. It was muscle memory. This was simply how conflict worked in that world. Then another angel intervened and finished the fight. When the blade was pulled free, Goldsmith saw the man's intestines spill out onto the pavement. That was the end of it. He stood up, adjusted himself, and walked away as if the incident were already over. What made the account disturbing wasn't the graphic detail alone, it was the tone. Goldsmith spoke as if this outcome was expected, even normal. In biker wars, violence wasn't an exception, it was a process. Something that unfolded according to unwritten rules everyone understood. Goldsmith also spoke about learning painful lessons regarding vulnerability. In a separate fight, rivals grabbed his long ponytail and used it to control him, yanking his head and dragging him through the chaos. He survived the beating, but the humiliation cut deeper than the injuries. Not long after, he shaved his head completely. In his world, even something as simple as hair could become a weakness. As president, Goldsmith enforced the club's image with absolute intolerance. When word reached him that a man in prison was wearing a fake Hells Angels tattoo, there was no debate. Orders were passed along. Inside those prison walls, heated spoons were used to burn the tattoo off the man's skin. The message was clear and final. The patch was sacred, and impersonation would be punished. Perhaps the most chilling moment Goldsmith described involved restraint rather than bloodshed. In one tense standoff, 90 Hells Angels faced 60 outlaws in a confined space. The air was heavy, and everyone waited for the signal. The final decision rested with him. Goldsmith chose not to give the order. That single choice may have prevented a massacre, revealing that in the Hells Angels, real power wasn't always shown through violence, but through the ability to stop it. Number 6. Jay Dobbins.
I was always willing, and I was always looking for undercover opportunities. They approached me with this opportunity to make a run at the Hells Angels. I thought I was prepared. I wasn't prepared. There was a business card in my wallet that was from the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. So he pushes this card in front of me and he says, what's the story on this? And when I look up, he's got his elbows bipoded on his desk and he's holding a pistol in my face. In the very corner.
Jay Dobbins never planned to become part of the Hells Angels. He wasn't a biker chasing rebellion or status, he was an undercover federal agent assigned to infiltrate one of the most dangerous outlaw motorcycle clubs in America. Yet for nearly 2 years, Dobbins lived so deeply inside the organization that members trusted him with conversations meant only for insiders. Every handshake carried weight. Every ride could end with a gun to his head. One mistake, one slip in language or behavior would have exposed him instantly. When the operation finally collapsed and Dobbins' true identity became known, the retaliation was swift. Threats flooded in, not only against him, but against his wife and children. Then the message escalated. His home was set on fire while his family was inside. They escaped with seconds to spare. The point wasn't murder, it was terror. The club wanted him to understand that leaving didn't mean safety. What unsettled the public most were Dobbins' revelations about how full acceptance was earned. According to him, murder wasn't a rumor or an initiation myth. It was an expectation. Leadership made it clear that his role was to kill members of rival clubs, particularly the Mongols. When Dobbins proposed taking a target to Mexico, the response was immediate and practical. He was handed a firearm and given specific instructions on shot placement, how to aim, where to fire, and how to make sure the skull was penetrated. To survive, Dobbins had to fake the act. With help from law enforcement, a staged killing was arranged. A shallow grave was dug in the desert. A task force member posed as the victim, bound and dressed in a seized Mongol's vest. Cow blood and animal remains were used to make the scene believable. Photographs were taken. Dobbins returned with the evidence and told the story exactly as expected. The reaction chilled him. No one questioned the details. No one asked for proof beyond the photos. Instead, the club accepted the killing as routine. Dobbins was congratulated and embraced. In that moment, he understood how normalized murder had become. Dobbins also spoke publicly about the killing of Cynthia Garcia, a woman who angered members at a clubhouse gathering. What began as intimidation turned lethal. She was beaten, stabbed, and dumped in the desert, her life erased over a perceived insult. Dobbins' work ultimately helped trigger major RICO indictments and dozens of arrests. But his experience remains one of the most dangerous infiltrations ever attempted, proof of just how far the Hells Angels expected loyalty to go. Number 5. Chuck Zito.
All right, here we go. Today we have former Hells Angel, actor, bodyguard, stuntman, and martial artist Chuck Zito. Welcome to Vlad TV.
Chuck Zito spent decades inside the Hells Angels and eventually rose to become president of the New York chapter, one of the club's most visible and influential charters. When Zito later spoke publicly about his time in the organization, many expected stories of shootings, beatings, or biker wars. Instead, what unsettled listeners most was something quieter and more revealing. A rule that was never written down, never officially announced, yet universally understood. In interviews, Zito admitted that across more than 20 years in the club, he could only vaguely recall a single black member. Even that memory wasn't clear. He wasn't sure of the man's name, chapter, or how long he stayed. That uncertainty itself said everything. The absence wasn't accidental. It wasn't the result of chance recruitment. It reflected an unspoken cultural boundary that had existed for decades. There were no formal policies banning anyone. No bylaws spelling it out. That wasn't necessary. The club's culture did the work on its own. Prospects learned early, often without a single word being said, who belonged and who didn't. Those who didn't fit the image rarely made it past the earliest stages. The message traveled through silence, glances, and tradition rather than rules. What made Zito's admission especially disturbing was his tone. He didn't frame it as a confession or a controversy. There was no visible discomfort, no attempt to defend or condemn it. He simply stated it as a fact of life inside the Hells Angels. That calm delivery revealed how normalized the exclusion had become. It wasn't driven by constant hostility, it was maintained by quiet agreement. Zito's account exposed a side of the Hells Angels that rarely makes headlines. The club's darkness wasn't limited to violence or organized crime. It also lived in the way identity was controlled. The same mechanisms that enforced loyalty, obedience, and silence also enforced boundaries around who was allowed to wear the patch. By choosing to speak openly, Zito pulled back the curtain on something many insiders understood but rarely acknowledged publicly. Once said out loud, it couldn't be ignored. His words showed that the Hells Angels weren't just a violent organization, they were a closed culture shaped by tradition, silence, and long-standing, unspoken rules that defined belonging just as much as any act of violence ever could. Number 4. George Christie.
Today, it seems to be the new norm. Everybody that's in an outlaw bike club, when they leave, they're out bad now. It's kind of, I started a trend maybe, when I left. But, there's a saying not only in the outlaw bike world, but I think in the outlaw world at large.
George Christie was a longtime Hells Angels member and former president of the Ventura chapter, a position that put him at the center of the club's internal culture and external conflicts. When Christie spoke publicly after leaving the life, his stories revealed something more disturbing than random violence. They showed how brutality could become ritual, something repeated, celebrated, and remembered as legend. One of Christie's most unsettling accounts involved a feared figure known as Smacky Jack. According to Christie, Smacky Jack was infamous for carrying a pair of dentist pliers and a small pouch on his belt. During confrontations, he wouldn't just knock opponents down, he would rip their teeth out and drop them into the bag. Later, those teeth were supposedly traded for shots of whiskey at bars. Whether exaggerated or not, the story spread quickly and became part of Hells Angels folklore, and that folklore mattered. Christie explained that reputation alone could control a room. People who knew the Smacky Jack stories often backed down before fights even started. The cruelty didn't need to happen every time. The possibility was enough. The legend went further. Christie said Smacky Jack once pulled out one of his own teeth in front of a bartender, proving there were no hard feelings, and exchanged it for a drink. It was grotesque, but also symbolic. Pain was currency. Fear was entertainment. Christie also described how deeply personal issues could erupt into mass violence. In one notorious incident, an Angel's ex-wife began a relationship with a Mongol member. That single betrayal spiraled into a massive brawl involving dozens of bikers. It wasn't planned warfare, it was emotional ignition. Anger, humiliation, and pride collided all at once. During the chaos, Christie recalled seeing a fallen angel grab a spiked motorcycle sprocket from the ground and start swinging it wildly. Blood splattered. Men screamed. The fight escalated beyond control until police finally stormed in and shut it down. By then, the damage was done. Christie's interviews showed that Hells Angels violence wasn't always strategic. It wasn't always about territory, drugs, or power. Often, it was about reputation and respect, two things that could never be allowed to slip. In that world, cruelty became ritual, stories became warnings, and legend itself became a weapon. Number 3. Mel Chansey.
It's Big Mel Chansey. I can't say enough good about Mel. He's one of these guys that just carries this light around with him, makes everybody around him happy. Mel is a former president of the Hells Angel biker gang. He ran the Hells Angels in Chicago during their infamous war with the Outlaws. We're going to talk about the fact that Mel had to live most of his life with a target on his back.
Mel Chansey was once one of the most powerful figures in the Hells Angels, serving as president of the Chicago chapter during a period when the club's influence and criminal exposure were rapidly expanding. When Chansey later spoke publicly, he didn't romanticize the life. Instead, he described it as a machine powered by money, pressure, and ultimately, betrayal. According to Chansey, cocaine wasn't a side hustle, it was the financial backbone. He described how new members initially tried to balance regular jobs with club obligations, only to burn out quickly. 10-hour workdays, followed by late-night meetings, road trips, and fights weren't sustainable. Once members learned the drug trade, everything changed. The money came faster, the hours disappeared, and the lifestyle became possible. Dealing wasn't always about excess. For many, it was how they stayed afloat inside the club. But Chansey's interview went far beyond drugs. One of his most disturbing revelations involved a lawyer who had previously assisted the club with firearms cases. After falling into a coma, the lawyer woke up to discover his wife had left him, married his business partner, and taken control of his practice. Enraged and humiliated, he approached Chansey with a request: help arrange her murder using an explosive device. Chansey said he refused outright. He claimed there were lines he wouldn't cross, especially involving personal vendettas that weren't club business. But refusal didn't end the plot. Another angel accepted the money and attempted the hit. A bomb was placed beneath the woman's car, poorly constructed and improperly triggered. When it detonated, It didn't kill her, it burned her feet and legs instead. That failure unraveled everything. The investigation exposed informants, including the source of the explosives. Arrests followed. Federal attention intensified. For Chansey, it marked the beginning of the end. Facing more than 9 years in federal prison, Chansey made a decision that would permanently sever his ties to the club. He cooperated with authorities, openly identifying the Hells Angels as a criminal organization. In return, his sentence dropped dramatically. But inside the club, cooperation was unforgivable. Rumors spread. Former brothers labeled him a rat. What made the betrayal especially bitter was what came next. Chansey's testimony helped clear other members of drug conspiracy charges he refused to falsely support. Yet none of that mattered. Loyalty in the Hells Angels, he explained, was conditional. Once you became a liability, the patch offered no protection. His interview exposed a harsh truth. Power inside the club was temporary. When survival demanded it, even leaders were disposable. Number 2.
I'm amazed that anybody's interested in it. It's just the story of my life the last 40 years in the club. It's about riding motorcycles, going to jail, being with my friends, traveling around the country on a motorcycle.
Okay.
Sonny Barger wasn't just a Hells Angel. He was the Hells Angel most people recognized. The man who gave the club a public face while simultaneously reinforcing its mystique. As a founding member of the Oakland chapter, Barger helped shape the modern Hells Angels into a global organization, turning a loose brotherhood of riders into a disciplined, feared, and structured club. Unlike many members who avoided the spotlight, Barger stepped directly into it. He gave interviews, wrote books, and spoke openly about the outlaw lifestyle. But what made his appearances disturbing wasn't bravado, it was control. Barger understood the power of language. He never admitted to crimes outright, never panicked, never sounded reckless. He framed the Hells Angels as a brotherhood bound by loyalty, respect, and independence, even while federal investigations painted a very different picture. Behind that calm exterior was a man deeply embedded in violence and conflict. Barger lived through decades of biker wars, rivalries, and law enforcement pressure. He was indicted multiple times, including on conspiracy and weapons charges, and spent years in and out of prison. Each time, he returned with his reputation intact or strengthened. Survival itself became part of his legend. Barger also represented a shift in outlaw culture. He believed media could be used as a weapon. By speaking publicly, he controlled the narrative, blurring the line between myth and reality. To supporters, he was articulate and principled. To critics, he was calculating and dangerous. Both views fed the legend. Even illness didn't silence him. After losing his vocal cords to cancer, Barger communicated through a voice box, continuing to speak, give interviews, and address club matters. The mechanical tone only added to his aura. It reinforced the idea that Sonny Barger wasn't going away quietly. What made Barger unsettling was not constant brutality, but permanence. He outlasted rivals, prosecutions, and even his own body. While other angels faded into prison cells or obscurity, Barger remained a symbol of continuity. Sonny Barger embodied the Hells Angels' greatest strength and darkest reality. Discipline over chaos, image over confession, and loyalty enforced not just through violence, but through endurance. Number 1. Billy Queen. Billy Queen was never a Hells Angel, yet his presence loomed over many of the stories told by those who were. He existed in the margins of the outlaw biker world, operating in a parallel universe where deception was a survival skill and loyalty was always conditional. While angels built their identity around patches and brotherhood, Queen worked from the shadows, quietly unraveling those same structures. Queen was best known as a high-level informant who successfully infiltrated the Mongols' motorcycle club. For years, he lived a double life, earning trust inside one outlaw organization while secretly feeding intelligence to federal authorities. His role didn't make headlines in the same way as club presidents or enforcers, but the evidence he helped secure would ripple across multiple investigations. That ripple became visible in J. Dobbin's undercover operation. When Dobbins needed to convince the Hells Angels that he had killed a Mongol rival, investigators turned to seized evidence from Queen's case. A Mongol's vest taken during Queen's infiltration was pulled from storage and used as part of the staged murder scene. The vest wasn't symbolic, it was proof that undercover operations fed off one another, building layers of deception on top of deception. Queen's name surfaced quietly in interviews, usually in passing, but his influence was undeniable. Without informants like him, many of the Angels' darkest secrets would have remained sealed behind the club's code of silence. His work showed how law enforcement didn't just confront outlaw clubs head-on, it learned to think like them. What made Queen's role disturbing was how deeply he had to disappear into the life. Informants weren't observers. They participated. They were present during crimes, surrounded by men capable of instant violence, knowing that discovery meant torture or death. Queen's survival wasn't guaranteed by a badge. It depended on constant performance. Unlike former Angels who later spoke publicly, Queen could never fully step into the light. His story remained fragmented, referenced through court records, seized evidence, and other men's testimonies. He existed as a shadow felt more than seen. Billy Queen's presence reminds us that the Hells Angels world wasn't sealed. It was penetrated quietly, patiently, and at enormous human cost. Behind every disturbing interview was another layer of manipulation, risk, and betrayal, often carried out by people who never wore the patch, but risked everything to expose what it truly meant.